CGTN's Elaine Reyes spoke to Scott Dowell, the head of vaccine surveillance at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
We haven't seen that level of mortality with recent outbreaks. So the closest that we've come is the SARS epidemic of 2003 and the pandemic of influenza of 2009. And if you put those two together, you get the sense of what a very severe epidemic would be like. SARS spread very, very quickly from southern China to lots of parts of the world within 3 months, and then was essentially wiped out. It was severe. It killed maybe 10% of the people that it infected. In contrast, the H1N1 pandemic of influenza of 2009 spread worldwide from California and Mexico all across the world within weeks. Much quicker, infected many more people, but fortunately had a much lower mortality rate. There's really no reason that the next pandemic won't be some combination of those two pathogens, both lethal as SARS was and highly transmissible as H1N1 influenza was. And that's the kind of thing that the GPMB, this new board, was confronting when they were thinking about the threat of the next pandemic.
So other than getting vaccinated, what are some steps that people can take to prevent something like that from happening to them?
Unfortunately, a vaccine is unlikely to be ready in the early weeks of the next pandemic. And so people should not assume that they're going to be protected by a vaccine. We should be putting in place the steps that are needed to develop a vaccine as quickly as possible. And that was one of the key recommendations of this new board. But in addition, people need to be able to depend on their governments in being able to pick up the epidemic early, respond effectively. Basic things like knowing who's in charge and planning ahead. These are the kinds of things that the GPMB is recommending in this first round of recommendations this year.
And how realistic is that coordinating a future response among governments across borders?
We have seen that work better and better over the last 10 years or so. So in the wake of SARS, the world's countries got together and all countries agreed to comply with the international health regulations that were rewritten in 2005. That's rare circumstances where all countries around the world agree on anything. But the threat that comes from these kinds of pandemics brought countries together to prepare. So I'm actually optimistic that if there was a global threat like the one that we're talking about, that countries will want to work together. But it's a matter of practicing ahead of time. And the time to get these things ready, to figure out who's in charge and how this is going to work, is now. And this is the point that the GPMB is making.